Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. It's an honor, as it always is, to be with you again this week as we continue in our message series on the book of Isaiah. Today, it's the destruction on the horizon. We're finishing up chapter 5, verses 26 through 30. Last week, if you remember, we talked about how Israel basically threw the gauntlet in God's face and said, bring what you're going to bring, right? Isaiah, this prophet, is telling us judgment is coming. Bring it. Show us what you got and hurry up. Hurry up so we can see it. Israel's about to find out. That old adage, be careful what you wish for, is now going to bring itself upon Israel. And they're going to experience what God has for them. But they've brought this on themselves. They will reap what their sins have sown. But there's a flip side to this coin, and we haven't really talked about this yet. We've just been kind of pounding the sin and the judgment and the coming exile that's coming upon Israel. But the flip side of that judgment coin is need. What do I mean by need? You've heard me say nothing happens in a vacuum. So God will bring in our lives things to get our attention, right? When we start to drift, when we start to wander from the narrow path, God will bring things into our lives to hopefully cause a course correction, to get us back on the path. And for Israel, the course correction now is going to be a violent one. It's going to be invasion. It's going to be exile. It's going to be destruction. It's going to be blood and death and clouds of war. But remember that His will, as Jesus says, is that all who believe in the Son should be saved. Jesus desires that all would turn and be saved. And I'm sure you know in your life people that have experienced different levels of course corrections in order to get them looking up on the vertical rather than the horizontal. So God's bringing what's needed in order to wake up His nation to its sin and get him to turn back to Him. And as we know from history, from the Bible, that happens. There is always a remnant. And Israel will return, and Jerusalem will be rebuilt, and the temple will be rebuilt. But this is what God will do. And depending on the course correction needed, God will mete out the appropriate action. So, our first verse today, chapter 5, verse 26. He will raise a signal for nations far away and whistle for them from the ends of the earth. And behold, quickly, speedily, they come. The destruction that's approaching has been ordained by God. His justice appoints it. His anger has been kindled against His nation, right? Against those that have sinned against Him. And His hand has been forced. Why has His hand been forced? He's God. Yes, He's God, but He's holy. He's good. He's righteous. He cannot stand by and allow sin to have its place unchecked. Why did He send Jesus? To triumph over sin and death, right? His honor and His holiness must be vindicated. He has no choice here. And so when you look at this, and especially this thought of His honor and His holiness needing to be vindicated, you think of Jesus in the temple overturning the table of the money changers. Jesus had righteous anger about what was happening in the temple because they were defiling his Father's house and damaging his Father's reputation. So Jesus was doing this in that instance. He was upholding the reputation of God. And so he went in and did what he did to restore order of sorts in the temple and to bring back and uphold the goodness and the holiness of God's reputation. So the nations are coming quickly. That tells us that the nations and its armies are operating in accordance with God's will. Right? The armies of the world and the great nations of the world and the Alexander the Greats and the Roman empires, they were not doing anything that was outside of God's will. They were not the ones shaping history. God was using them, allowing them to do what needed to be done so that history would be shaped in accordance with his will. Go back to the spreading of the gospel. Look at the timing of it. At that time, Rome was established and the highway system that Rome had built was in place. What better way to spread the message of the gospel? To get the message out to the Gentiles, to Asia, to Ephesus, to Philippi, to Colossae. Right? The road system was in place because Rome had built it. And so the time then to get the gospel message out was ripe. So nothing happens outside of God's will. So when you think about it, leaders rise and fall all the time. We've seen it through history. We see it today. Nations rise and fall. Armies. Again, we talked about Alexander the Great and the Roman Empire. They come and go. But they come and go in accordance with God's will. It's not happenstance. It happens in accordance with God's plan. So Isaiah says God will whistles and the armies that he calls will rise up. They will leave their citadels and they will be on the march to do his bidding. The sad part about this is that the people will die in great numbers, not just soldiers on the battlefield, but mothers, wives, children, old men and old women will be murdered in cold blood inside the gates of the city. Because that is what war at this time, well, you see it now. You see it in Israel and Gaza, how the innocent suffer. There is no care for those bystanders in times of war, whether you agree with it or not. And so civilians will die in Israel in great numbers, and those that survive will not even have the will in them to bury the bodies. And all of this is being fueled by sin, and it has to be cleansed. The nation needs to be cleansed of its sins, and this fire will burn until every last bit of it is burned away. So verses 27 through 29. None is weary, none stumbles, none slumbers or sleeps. Not a waistband is loose, not a sandal strap broken. Their arrows are sharp, all their bows bent. Their horses' hooves seem like flint, and their wheels like the whirlwind. Their roaring is like a lion. Like young lions they roar. They growl and seize their prey. They carry it off, and none can rescue. The armies that God is calling are prepared. They are not caught off guard, and they are not caught lacking. They are rested. Their armor and equipment has been repaired and oiled. Their swords, their arrows, their spears sharpened, bows restrung. Horses are shod, chariot wheels greased for the long march ahead, and they're coming. They're coming quickly. And once the battle starts, they will not ask for, nor will they grant quarter. There will be a time right before the battle starts that Israel is given one last chance. God tells them, surrender and you will be allowed to stay. But they don't take his advice. And all hell breaks loose. The armies are hunched like a lion. You've seen those pictures, National Geographic or TV specials where the lion is hunched, ready to pounce at just the right moment. That is what these armies are like. They are waiting to pounce on their prey. And once they seize Israel in its jaws, nothing will be able to pry her loose until she is destroyed. Verse 30, they will growl over it on that day, like the growling of the sea. And if one looks to the land, behold, darkness and distress, and the light is darkened by its clouds. When the army comes against the walls of Jerusalem, it will be like the sound of great waves crashing against cliffs. Those of you, we lived in England for a while, you've seen the cliffs of Dover. It is like that. When these armies come up against the walls of Jerusalem, the noise is going to be tumultuous. There will be no mistaking what has happened. It will be like the sound of thunder, and it will be ominous. It will strike fear into the people, inside the gates, inside the walls. And there will be no hope because there will be no place to go and nowhere to hide. The darkness and the clouds of war will engulf the land. It will be great distress, and there will be no sun to break through those clouds. Now, as I've been doing, I like to bring this forward to today, and I know some people are tired of the lectures, but until God tells me to stop, we're going to continue to talk about this because it needs to be brought forward. Because God is speaking to us now through the book of Isaiah. You look at what's happening in England, in Europe, waves of illegals coming in. And now in England, battles on the streets. And those who are of that nation now are now considered the enemy. You can't post a social media post about what is happening in the nation without coming under scrutiny and possibly being arrested. This is what is happening. The nation's leaders have turned on their own people. Pay attention to what's happening there because it's coming here. You can see it. Things are already in motion for what is happening there to possibly happen here. It's going to be an interesting couple of months leading up to November. And it could be an interesting couple of months leading up to January. Always revolves around the political, doesn't it? But we are being warned in the books of Isaiah and in the book of Jeremiah. Through those chapters, we are being warned that if we continue down this road of ignoring God and elevating ourselves, we cannot help but suffer some of the same types of consequences that Israel did. Why? Because God is God. He has no choice. We fling the gauntlet in his face all the time these days by what we do and what we allow and what is happening in our churches. If God must vindicate his holiness and his honor, then he hasn't changed. He must do so now. How he will do it, I'm not sure. Again, you can see what's happening. I believe it'll be something akin to what's happening in England, but I'm not a prophet. I don't know. But I know who God is, and I know he cannot stand for the sinful behavior of the nations of the world and not do something about it. So Matthew Henry finishes this section on Isaiah in his commentary with this. He says, quote, "First, look round to the earth, to the land, to that land that used to be the land of light and the joy of the whole earth. And behold, darkness and sorrow, all frightful, all mournful, nothing hopeful. Secondly, look up to heaven, and there the light is darkened, where one would expect to have found it. If the light is darkened in the heavens, how great is that darkness? If God hide his face, no marvel the heavens hide theirs and appear gloomy. It is our wisdom, by keeping a good conscience, to keep all clear between us and heaven, that we may have light from above, even when clouds and darkness are round about us." It always comes down to choices. Always. Will we choose to stay on this path of rejecting God, or will we turn and repent and allow him to reestablish the nations in accordance with his will? It's up to us, but I pray we choose the narrow path to salvation.